Bring a Trailer podcast.
Is that healthy? What's going on here? What's the vintage of these beers?
Not old. I will wait.
All right. Well, let's assume that is a healthy beer. Cheers. Happy Friday.
Cheers.
This
Happy
was
Friday.
a weak. That was a really weak cheers.
It was a weak cheers.
There
we go. Got a good clip.
Good clink. Oh, God, that's good. Oh, Reddy would be bummed that he's missing
German beer.
German beer.
Yeah.
There's actually good photography lessons from today, I think. I'm not going to call individual cars out, but we can talk about some scenarios that might have improved results. Was your idea to talk kind of broadly about photos and how sellers can improve them, or did you want to?
I have some categories. That's all right.
Mm-hmm.
First one was going to be like what to look for when you're hiring a photographer. Some photo tips, definitely, but I have a list of like 6-7 photographers who I think are worth following if you're interested in getting into car photography.
I love that.
And then
like these are Instagram.
Yeah, they're I'm pulling usernames on the site.
Oh yeah,
because one thing to really important to differentiate is that we're not talking about automotive photography broadly.
Mm-hmm.
That's very different,
right? Because we're not looking for somebody with crazy filters and black and white and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely not. If the front page of Road and Track is your lead image on a Bring a Trailer auction, you're probably
not transparent.
Not good. Very different purposes, very different usage cases. Some photographers do blend into both of those spaces, obviously.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's an advantage. Sometimes it's a disadvantage, and it can be really difficult. And we wish those photographers the best, but sometimes it doesn't always work out with them.
Yeah.
I think we've actually, honestly, probably even experienced the same with writers.
Yes.
Right. It's not too dissimilar of a skill set. Other categories was going to go into. So if you want to get into photography of cars, like what does it take? What should you be looking out for?
I love that topic. You know what? Save the rest because we're already in the podcast now. I think.
For it. Okay.
I think we're already in it. It's me and Beck. We don't need to do an intro. We're already drinking beer, and everything you just said was fantastic. Do you think? Okay, so I want to ask you a philosophical question. Though.
Go for
it. So our goal with photos on Bring a Trailer is to make sure that the cars are presented as honestly and transparently as possible, but also thoroughly, right? Like we want to see, if possible, it's not always possible depending on a seller's skill set or how thorough or how much they understand our philosophy. But ideally, you want as thorough a presentation as possible. A couple 100 photos showing all the parts of the cars, all the flaws, all the underside stuff, everything. However, you do still want to grab somebody, right? So some artistry is important. Like how do you think about the give and take there of both, right? Because sometimes the most inspiring photo, the car speeding, camera tilted at an angle, some lens flares in front of trees, that's not necessarily transparent, but that is what makes you want to click on a listing, right? You want compelling images and transparent images, right? Both.
Completely. And probably that balance can be best represented by the inline images versus the photo gallery. Kind of two different purposes there. The lead image, if you think about the structure of how Bring a Trailer is, it's what's going to pull you in on the front page of the site, what's going to pull you in the sidebar. It's the same image that's pulled into the daily email. That is like basically your foremost, most important eye candy. We listed years ago, I think even before White Glove, a Formula Drift car. And like the lead image,
I remember it was like rear wheel drive converted Hyundai or something like that, or maybe
I was thinking it was a Honda.
Okay,
but yes, it was.
But normally a front wheel drive car that was rear wheel drive.
Completely, and it had like the V8 from like the minivan,
right?
Because they're allowed to put whatever engines in the family of that.
And if your lead image isn't smoke pouring out of the back, right? Like you failed.
Was sideways on an embankment with smoke everywhere, right? That's not going to help anyone ascertain the condition of that car, or establish confidence in sort of what its current state is.
But it gets you to click on the listing, or gets you excited, or
absolutely,
whatever.
Right? So,
and that is somewhat telling the story of the car since it's a drift car,
for sure, and probably. We've talked about it multiple times. One of the best examples of this is going to be 911R.
Yes.
With Josh, who's his photographer, username the Image Engine. Josh has shot, I looked it up, over 800 auctions. He has shot, not just what has been listed, but he has shot.
Right, because 911R has 1,200 or something on their own.
So, right, and there's occasionally, because he's in two different locations now, some things he's had to do separately. But what that means is his lead image is very much eye candy.
Mm-hmm.
And the car is actually, in fact, sometimes even small in the image, right? It's not always filling up the whole frame, which there's always a give and take of that as well. There's discussions with sellers on how big it should be sometimes. But when you think about what's going to be the image to grab you in, the same, honestly, that argument goes into videos. I'm a big believer that videos, for the most part, are really proof of life.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
It's just, what would you
touch
do?
that exhaust pipe before you do the cold start?
The comments people have of like, I'm so glad he touched the airbox before he started the engine.
Hey, not everyone's perfect. I think I've seen a dude with like a one of those like digital like remote thermometers where you like point it at the COVID patient's head across the table so you don't have to get too close.
How long until some dad who's so tired from the last 4 years is using the touchless thermometer that his kid had to use every day before going to school?
God, totally.
Starts using it on
I'm ready for it now. I don't like taking my kid's temperature. We actually finally got one of those ear ones, that they use at the doctor's office with the like
correct.
They have the sleeve of
you eject the sleeve
plastic cones.
Yes. It's all part of our nurse cosplay.
Yes.
That we've all gone into.
Totally. I can't even remember what we were talking about, but you're so right.
The thermometer on the video.
Oh, yeah.
So those proof of life videos, I think of it as like, what is it that you would do if you were on site with the car, right? Because the photos, the goals with the photos is that we're going to show you even more than you would normally be able to even see. Like, we want to establish more confidence than you would even have if you could even be there in person.
Correct. Like things people aren't necessarily going to put a car on a lift for you when you go look at it. Right.
And are you going to climb underneath the door bottoms? Like, you don't even think to do that. Right. You're not going to pull the carpet and look at what the floors look like.
Somebody's screaming at their phone right now. And they're like, I do that.
For sure.
But most people don't, including me. I've bought some doozies in my day.
A lot of hindsight. Wish I had.
Yes, totally.
But with the video, though, it is essentially recreating what it is you might do when you're there.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's a balance to that as well, because probably the most classic complaint about videos we ever get is if the driving video is not
entertaining. I know, and it bothers me too. Because and a lot of times people do want to baby their car, but this is that same blend that you're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. Between capturing people's attention and getting them excited, mm-hmm. which ideally we do want to do. We sometimes get criticized for our listings being too bland or whatever, but it's not what we're going for. Mm-hmm. We want people to be excited. And a lot of people do get excited about the listings they see and the cars they see on Bring a Trailer. But yeah, we want to capture people's imagination, but also want to provide people, to your point, with as much information as we can. You
want to inspire what that life could be if you had that car. And so when we're talking about...
I definitely redline a car when I take it on a test drive when I'm going to buy it. That is something I do.
With the owner in the passenger seat?
Maybe not complete bouncing off the rev limiter, but yeah, usually.
Sure, you want to make sure that it's healthy all the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? But that takes some guts, I think. But when it comes to the photography aspect, on one end of the spectrum, if one end of the spectrum is super inspirational, magazine quality stuff. At the other end, it's a car like in a photo booth on a turnstile, right? Boring as all heck. It probably maybe helps give you a sense of the condition. Mm-hmm. And so you also don't want to be on that end that's where I think the driving video comes in, where someone's just sort of driving around town. Look, I'm showing it shifts just fine. I think you and I specifically discussed what should be the minimums of this driving video. There should be a pull, but really, I think the philosophy behind it is the driving video should show.
What gear is the optimum pull gear? I think it's the second gear pull.
Second gear, for sure.
Second gear pull.
The philosophy behind the driving video should be demonstrating what that car is best at. So if it is a sports car, it should be driven sportingly.
Yeah.
If it is an off-roader, I'm telling you really would help you to go find a gravel road.
Put it in four-wheel drive.
And move it along. Driving your Coyote-powered Bronco 4x4 around the block just to show that it rolls and goes isn't doing much for anybody. Mm-hmm. You want to show it at speed, right? What is it at best at? Mm-hmm. If it's for cruising, it's a convertible, put the top down, cruise around town, show us that. Yeah. I think that's actually going to establish more confidence while still being inspirational.
Agreed.
Because with that inspiration, that's what's getting lost in those what we call kill room photos, mm-hmm. where the car is on the turnstile, because
I've avoided using that term. Right? I use it somewhat derisively, but I agree with you. That's what they look like to me.
It's treating the car as an asset and not as an opportunity.
Right.
And an asset you can price easily. An opportunity you can't. Totally. And that's kind of what you want in the end result.
100% right. Although a lot of people, which is a totally valid thing do think about cars that way, right?
Sure,
And
for sure.
so, like,
It's people who respond to emails with the number of units. I have 4
totally,
units. So-
totally. Or like, I mean, sometimes I see these videos of, it's usually a exotic or expensive car, and the guy drives it real slow, and I get bummed out. And I'm like, come on.
Sure.
But then you're like, maybe I've thought about this a lot. That's maybe how this person, either they're intimidated by all the horsepower, or they actually, it's a low mileage example of an old car. They actually don't want to drive it very hard. That's very different than me. But who am I to say how people should treat their?
It might
their
actually be
vehicle?
a selling factor, right?
Totally.
This person babied this car around,
Yes.
right? So I've had this literally, this happens to me probably once a week. And it's because we always tell the photographer, like, ask the owner when they're driving the car for the video, if they're comfortable to like show off what it can do,
Mm-hmm.
right? But inevitably, a lot of the driving videos come back. They're just, driving around town.
Mm-hmm.
And what we want then is for like the community, hopefully, to appreciate that this person is being careful. But of course, no, someone chimes in, boring driving video.
It's one of these damned if you do, damned if you don't things.
For sure. And so the strategy that I've actually implemented with a few of those sellers is basically admit it. Like, just be like, yeah, sure, you're totally right. Boring driving video. I hope that whoever buys this car sends me a video of them ripping it.
Yes. And congrats to you for buying a car that's been babied.
Correct.
For
Exactly.
my entire ownership.
Right. There's a strategy with all those.
Sure.
Just lean into it.
And by the way, we have wannabe cops sometimes too, who are like, that was too aggressive. We've seen that with videos too.
There's a little bit of a discussion on the back end also of like, can we really post this video of what this person's done?
We've had that debate a couple times, but sometimes it's like, that's an LS swapped whatever, and it's going to get to 100 pretty quick, and the guy's on a back road or whatever. I mean, I'm not super judgy about those things. I mean, within reason, obviously. We don't want people to be dangerous, but you can be dangerous. I always, when people say speed kills, I'm like, man, I know some people who drive pretty slow who are pretty sketchy. Pretty sketchy. I don't want to ride with them, and they are definitely driving under the speed limit. Let's go back to the first point you were going to make, because you've hinted at it a couple times here. By the way, you mentioned 911R, great with photos. They're also great at that video part, because they famously do really, really good driving videos.
People go to those listings with no intention to buy the car, just to watch that driving video.
They would win video of the year probably every year if we didn't give that out. You could only win it once. Talk again about up top, when you didn't think we were doing a pod, but we were. You said you wanted to talk folks through how to select a photographer. And for folks who don't know, just to remind them, Beck manages and runs our white glove department, so deals with photographers a lot, and is also a former professional photographer. So you've got the right guy on the mic here. Talk a little bit about how folks, when they're going to hire a photographer, which we always highly recommend. We have our own service that people can use. We can also recommend photographers. And then, if you have a friend or somebody who knows how to use a camera, we always recommend it. Better photos, you can speak to it, but they pay dividends, right? You never waste money on better photos.
Correct. It's essentially the equivalent of detailing a car, right? It is a minimal investment. It's also typically a flat cost, right? Unassociated to what the actual car is. And so the more expensive the car is, the more important it is, right? The presentation should always be commensurate to the quality of the car.
Yes.
So 3 things specifically to look out for when you're hiring a photographer. If you're not going to go through white glove, that's fine. If you've got your own, or you're looking around, or you're interviewing people, whatever it is. First one is that customer-facing professionalism. That is a tough one. Photographers are artists. I've experienced it myself. Many of the photographers who are phenomenally talented but not busy working are the ones who struggle to explain to a customer why it is we need the car here at a certain time, why it is that the car needs to be clean in a honestly just a nice, candid way that is not going to turn off the seller. I think a lot of these people selling a car, it's much like a house. They don't do it that often. And I think that sometimes us in this industry, we're so desensitized to it that we just treat it like, come in the door, get your photos, get out of here. Let's keep going. Like we're fine with it. But for these people selling what is sometimes their second most valuable asset they have, that's a very, very crucial one. So if you're out there looking for your photographer, making sure this person is responsive. If they're not as responsive, you might want to move on. Second one, their ability to problem solve in the field. So that is extremely difficult. Car auction photographers are actually quite akin to a job I specifically used to have as a photojournalist, which is the fact that you don't have that much control.
It's a partnership between you and the owner of the car.
And the weather and the time and all of this. And classically, a studio photographer works in a very additive mindset because you're starting from a blank slate. So you bring the car in, you bring in the lights, you choose a backdrop, you're editing everything in. as a photojournalist, or in these cases,
that's why a lot of people end up moving into the kill room, don't you think? Because they get tired of,
It's less stressful.
Yeah.
Far more stressful.
You control your environment.
Is being a photojournalist, or in this case, a car auction photographer. You actually have to be reductive. You have to go into a space and be like, okay, what's the distracting background? Get that out of the way. What's this on the car? Get that out of the way. Who's that person in the background? Wait till they move. It's all about removing the distractions so that you can actually try and get to an image that is being seen and
which
respected.
Can sometimes probably be a lot more stressful than snapping the lens or snapping the shutter, right?
100%. Because that is the ability to see through that real life moment and know what it takes to get the picture that you've seen on the site. That's the difference between a quality photographer and a one-hit wonder. Because it's the same with music, right? People, the one-hit wonder musicians classically have been said that they don't know what ingredients put out that one famous song, and thus
I wrote that song in 15 minutes. I don't get why everyone likes it.
Why can't do it again, right? Whereas if you're able to deconstruct as a photographer, what are the elements that got to that picture, right? You should be able to see that lead photo on BaT and be like, okay, so I can see from here, it's probably a long lens. He's got a lot of space. The sun's in this whatever corner. He's probably using a scrim with this light. Like, that's what I think about when I'm looking at Josh's 911R photos. Like, that's what I'm doing every single time I look at it, is I'm trying to deconstruct in my head. And that's something that a photographer needs to be able to do as well. That technical understanding is also possibly the one thing that's lacking from the latest age of photographers, because it's technically so much easier to make pictures now than it used to be.
Because the equipment is better?
The equipment is so much easier.
It does so much for you.
It does so much for you. And even more scary is actually like all these AI videos that we see of like how
can you take a super compelling BaT gallery with an iPhone? You can, right?
You can. It's tough. So the sensor, the physical size of the sensor changes the type of lens that you need in order to fit a camera in the picture.
Yeah, okay.
And the smaller the sensor is, the more warped the image has to be in order for
the software can't fudge that too much.
It gets the point
you can take a pretty good gallery with an iPhone. We know that because it happens all the time. Not to your standards, but your standards are very high.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, it's probably the biggest differentiator of like when I see a listing and I see that like warped image where the nose of the car is really wide and the tail of the car is really small and you can't really see the shapes and the lines.
Super frustrating. Yep.
That's like a telltale of, okay, so it's somebody's cell phone.
I was looking at one today.
Right. Yep. Whereas if you have any kind of camera, even the micro 3/4 or a smaller crop factor DSLR or mirrorless camera, those at least have a large enough sensor such that when you are standing there, you have to zoom in, and that's going to straighten all the lines of the car.
Totally.
And that is at least the nice thing about hiring a photographer, is that they're going to, at a minimum, have that gear. They know how to use it, and that's going to elevate you just a little bit more. So that's where I think Plus service comes in so helpful.
Right, because they're going to have a good camera.
They've done this before. They come in, they've got a shot list. That's a crucial thing to look out for as well.
Right.
You can even ask, when you're hiring a photographer, ask them, hey, can I just see what your shot list is? I'd like to see what it is.
Or if you're hiring your own photographer and you know you're going to sell on BaT, like, we've got that. Like, we can provide that to you. Right?
So that's bringingtrailer.com/photography. There's a great shot list you can download from there to use if you're doing your own, or just hand it over to the photographer too, and just be like, hey, this is what I need for what I'm doing. And that will help reduce the gaps in your presentation dramatically. It'll not only improve the auction result, but it will also just make your experience better.
Totally.
Because you're not hunting back and forth and people are asking you questions and wondering this. Because I think a lot of people, when they get that auction on the first day, they get their notification in their email that whatever car has come live, they make their decision that first day whether or not they're going to hit that subscription.
Yep.
Right. They're not going to come back in 2, 3, 4 days randomly and then consider, I might actually look at it again. They want to hit that subscription button right then. And a lot of people, the value of their time, especially as the value of the car goes up, the likelihood of them actually tracking this auction goes down if on that first day there's stuff missing.
Yep.
So this is a strategy question. Another topic.
We've learned that lesson the hard way, by the way, over 150,000 auctions, and we're desperate to have other people learn from our mistakes on what you should have ready on day one.
I've had people who were like, hey, I've got paint meter readings. You can start the auction. I'm like, great, let's upload those now. Like, oh, no, we're going to trickle those throughout the auction. Why would you wait until day 5?
I know.
So and then, but what you can trickle during that time, I think, is lifestyle photography.
100%.
So
Inspirational kind of stuff.
And I think personal. Like, I don't mean like.
Oh no, that's the best stuff.
The stuff that you took the car on a road trip, that's inconsequential to the first day of the auction. Trickle that in throughout.
Well, sometimes those are old photos anyways, and so they're not exactly representative of what the car is like at that moment, which we are very, we're very thoughtful, and we want to be careful to make sure that the photos we're presenting are accurate, as close to that moment as possible. So, but if somebody went on a rad road trip 8 years ago and has awesome pictures of the car in front of freaking red rocks, and you want to see that still, or at least I do, because then I'm like, great, I want to take that car to that place. I want to go do that myself.
When I sold the cheapest running TII on the site,
is that still the
I think it might be the cheapest one. I think it might be the bottom.
I told you that Zach wanted to buy that car when it was on right before you worked for us. Okay, I remember it.
He was actually my specialist. I actually looked back at it one day.
Oh, that's interesting. He was the guy who
responded to stuff. But yeah, when I sold that car on the site, like 4 or 5 days through, I posted an autocross video from driving that car, right? Inconsequential to people necessarily following it on the first day, but it was just great entertainment. It sparked conversations again. It got engagement up again. A lot of the marketing that happens on BaT auctions, whether you've got white glove service or not, is bookended, right? It's firing off notifications at the beginning of your auction, and then it's firing off notifications at the end. And so a lot of sellers are really concerned when they're on day 3, 4, 5 of their auction, and they're like, hey, there hasn't been much engagement. I sort of was expecting to have to deal with this every single day. And what they don't realize is that there's kind of always a little bit of a lull there in the middle, right? People are sort of waiting it out. It's almost better to even.
I sent somebody a message before we got on today that was like, don't worry, all the bidding happens in the last few hours.
It's best to almost not even think of it as a 7-day long auction, but like a 6.9 day marketing exercise.
A preview, whatever you want. I mean, bids can come in and obviously people win on the first day sometimes, but totally agree with you, right? Totally agree with you that it's good. And it's not, I don't want to deviate from photography because that's what our main thing here, but it's also when you should tell the anecdotes and share all the personal stories and history and like whatever comes up. I think a lot of times people list a car, and then as people get excited about it during the live auction, the memories start coming back, and they kind of start getting excited about their own car again, or thinking about things they hadn't thought about before. And like, whenever people ask us, it's like, heck yeah, share that stuff, right? Like, absolutely.
The gold standard is the vintage photo with the story.
Oh my God, that's the best.
Right? That's the best. I mean, ideally,
you and I still talk about the 356. Yes. My dad was asking about that car the other day. He can't remember my name sometimes, but that it was an early B with speedster stripes, yellow.
Yes, side spears.
Yeah, side spears and a big GT tank. And he was a Caltrans landscape architect. Yep.
He had designed the park north of the Golden Gate Bridge, the Vista Point right there. A great just ownership story, great old photos, long time ownership. Yeah, would have loved to buy that car.
I want to find that car. Again, I should have bought that car. Anyway, share the third aspect that folks should look out for before we move away too much when they're thinking about hiring a photographer.
Perfect. Last one would be example work. Specifically example work. The best way, honestly, I would argue, is have them share their BaT username with you.
Yeah, okay.
Because we can tag their photo shoot history with their account. Now, not all photographers have gone to that effort. If you are a photographer out there and you've shot for BaT and you don't have a BaT account, shoot us an email, whiteglove@bringittrailer.com. We'll associate those shoots with your account. We find it very important to sort of build up that portfolio for you as well. We want you to use that to advertise yourself. And having those sort of example shoots to get a sense for what their style is, you get a sense for what cars they might know, right? Because no one knows their car perfectly. They don't know all the details. And so having a photographer who can come in with that is very helpful.
Totally. When you're thinking about like kind of what the experience or background level is as a photographer, if somebody's a skilled photographer, are they going to be capable with the things you've talked about, a shot list and knowing how to set up the right shoot? Is almost any kind of serious photographer able to shoot cars, or is that a specific skill set? I mean, obviously you get better at it the more you do of it, but I'm curious what you think about that.
There is a certain echelon of, if you have enough just technical skill, meaning you also understand lighting, not just the camera, I'm talking about natural lighting to deal with, you can do a great job with that shot list.
Okay.
There is sort of a breakthrough moment when you are coming up in photography of where you start to realize a lot of aha moments of like, oh, that's how you balance a strobe light with natural light. And that is a skill set that most photographers, like the vast majority of photographers, don't really understand. And it mostly takes experimentation and failure to get to the point.
Like anything else, learning the hard way.
Absolutely.
Right?
I'm going to give a shout out to a specific photographer, Evan Klein. He's based out of LA. He shoots for a White Glove. He does exactly that. He does an amazing balance of flash. Like he brings in strobes on light stands. He's very mobile. He can go anywhere and shoots car interiors in a way that you wouldn't normally ever see, because everyone is dealing with, the shadows inside of a car, right? You can't see that very well, especially if you're outdoors, where we've asked people to do these photo shoots before. That is a technical skill set that can be transferable to anything. You're doing portraits, headshots, whatever, some nature work as well. I come from specifically working with people. Like I never really photographed inanimate objects. I've shot a few cars, never really struck my fancy at all. But I love working with photographers. I love sort of managing them and helping them succeed. So that's been a great pairing as well.
You are very good at shooting people, and you've shot our staff, and it's always really compelling. And you're good at both for sure, Beck, still life and people. But I've noticed, I don't know anything about photography, as you know well, but I noticed so we usually hire, I don't think maybe we've hired white glove photographers, but we often hire people who shoot cars to shoot our alumni gatherings. And every once in a while I notice somebody who's either in the coverage, who's either good at shooting cars, but not good at shooting people, or they're fine at shooting cars. But then I see a couple shots of the crowd and I'm like, oh my God, that looks like something out of a magazine or a newspaper. I'm like, that person's like really got a knack for that. Maybe it's their background, or maybe some people just, gravitate more towards that. But I've noticed a lot of times that I'm more interested in the people shots, the shots of two guys talking over a car or whatever, than I am of the cars themselves.
Yeah, I shot our first alumni gathering back in like 2018 in LA.
The one the LA one, not the one out here at the factory with the big smokestack.
You're right.
You were at that one though too.
I was not at the powerhouse.
Oh, really?
I wasn't powerhouse.
You were working for us though, weren't you?
I think I just started.
Maybe, okay.
But we went down to Los Angeles for like our first really big at the Peterson, top floor of the parking garage.
We had great turnout there, and Bruce Meyer showed up in a Bugatti that he had sourced on BAT. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
We had an 037 arrived at that event. That was really awesome.
Right.
That was a sick
That's
car.
Right.
But I shot that.
Little DeMuro action at that event.
Was there.
He's distanced himself from Bring a Trailer since, but he was definitely at that event. What's that?
I think he bought his Ford GT that he had.
He
just
sure did.
bought.
Parked right next to my shitty 912.
Yep. So yeah, my assignment for that gig was photography, because I was a new hire, and you guys knew that my background was photography, and I definitely, looking back now, realized that the entire photo gallery from that event was people interacting with cars, not like shots of the cars, so that people who couldn't attend could live vicariously through our photo gallery, which I didn't really understand that assignment at the time. I was still very much approaching it as a photojournalist, which is all about the story of the people, not just the cars. That said, yes, 2 white glove photographers that we have hired for our events since then, Corey Mader, Dylan Leff.
Corey, that's right. Yeah.
Yep.
I think I met him. What event did he do? I think I met him.
Monterey,
I think.
Yes, definitely. I've done both those. And then we've had a few. We had an event in Indy that one of our photographers, I think Teddy Piper, shot. And yeah, that's a lot of it's going to come down to, I think, the personality of the photographer themselves, because some of your best people photographers out there, whether you're in journalism or you're in socials, whatever like that, are people who are actually very sociable, who can talk to people, make them feel comfortable, make it not feel weird and awkward that they're having their photo taken. That was always what the toughest part of my old job was, having to walk up to strangers on the street and say, "I'm sorry, sir, I'm with the Associated Press. Can I take a photo of you to represent a story that's going to go to millions of people that you have no idea what I'm going to be talking about?" That's a really tough sell.
And they immediately get awkward too, right, when that happens.
Correct. And also, for full clarity, that's not the pitch. No, it's not what you say.
No.
But you honestly, you start up honestly just as a human, because you want them to think of you as a person. And that's the same thing for these car shows, is at least thankfully when you're at a car show and you're taking pictures, people don't tend to think that's odd. Like they're sort of comfortable to that already. But that balance of showing the cars that are there so people can experience that aspect, while also cataloging the reaction to that is an important one too.
Yeah, man. I mean, my favorite thing, and I'm actually curious how you deal with this, my favorite thing are the captured candid moments, two old guys laughing over the open hood of their, 67 Camaro, or the little kid eating the ice cream cone, right? It's about to fall off. Those are moments that, they feel so authentic, but they're, you have to be ready to kind of catch them, right? I mean, I love that. I love that kind of stuff. And we get quite a bit of it at our alumni gatherings.
Oh, alumni gatherings are kind of just fodder for it.
Okay.
Right. It's fantastic.
I see the photographers are always snapping away the whole time. There's plenty
going along, plenty happening. I mean, the best is when people show up with like a cosplay experience, like people
totally
right.
Picnic out of the back of the Citroen.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I was just going to say. The green Citroen.
That guy's been twice, and he gets lots of photos taken.
I think he's great. An ice box is the same color as he does. The car as well.
I believe he's been interviewed on one of our videos too. I mean, it's hard to not gravitate towards that dude. Also, sick car. It's a DS wagon, green DS wagon, pea soup green. Very good.
That approach to photographing people's interaction with the cars, it rarely comes into auction listings, right? In fact, we typically don't really want to see people in the photo gallery. Yeah. However, I've seen a few great examples of interactions in video, whether it's an interview, especially if it's long-time ownership. Mm-hmm. That's a great one to do. It's tough to sometimes pivot like that when you're a photographer on site, right? To just be like, oh, I'm just going to all of a sudden change the scope of work
and become an interviewer.
Right. That's totally tough. But there's a lot of dealers, I think, repeat sellers who know how to do that, and they've done that relatively well. And that's, I think, a fantastic one, especially if it's not crucial to the start of the auction. You can drop that in later. That can be a nice one.
Randy just did a good one. I mean, it was obviously professionally done, but for when he sold the Integrale, that was an awesome video.
And that was Dylan Leff, who's down in San Jose. He shoots for White Glove as well. And yes, that's I think a great example of. I was actually here when he shot all those videos.
There was a walk and talk in that.
There was
like Aaron Sorkin, man.
And Randy is like classic, like one take, like, done,
ice cold,
did it. It was great. The first one. That. Move on to the next one. Time to go.
That's wonderful. Cool, dude. Well, you know what, dude? You're the host today. You have the topics. Sweet. Like, I don't know why we're even pretending like I'm asking you questions. What else did you want to talk about in terms of photographs and photography?
I can talk about specific photographers to follow on the site.
Sure, give some shout outs.
Cool.
We have a lot of good ones. So just preface that by saying this is like, not, I mean, I used to know, and you did too, back in the old days, we used to know pretty much every power seller, every power photographer, every power buyer. And now there's so many cars. We had 997 auctions live today.
I saw that.
I was like screaming at my computer, get to 1,000. We almost got there.
The problem was right when auctions started to close.
Good. Yes. Yeah. There were some good auctions closing. We had like 5 premium auctions closing to start the day.
A couple of them were mine.
Oh, the Emery car.
Emery car, fantastic. Which was great. That sold really well. What didn't sell though was a Sport Quattro.
It did. I got a good result though. I mean, that is like the car. I was talking to Carter, shout out Carter, who's Audi expert and has an Audi, coupe. And I think he edited that listing, and he's like, that's about the best one you're going to find. He's like, not a lot of buyers for that car. And he's like, the seller. So I'm curious what you say. He's like, the seller's probably the number one buyer for that car. Like the guy who's selling it is the guy who really wants it. Right?
We got a few messages.
It's one family owned.
One family owned. His father bought it. Great example. Phenomenal photos.
Yes,
from really when his father's buddy traveled to or was in Europe and collected the car for him. Drove around town. His father's buddy then took it to go show it to.
This is when it's new. You mean?
This is when it's new.
Yeah.
Took it to friends who was a school teacher to like show it to their class, and like all the boys ran out and wanted to take a photo with it, and that photo was in listing as well.
This is about what 86. When's the Sport Quattro? 80.
Before 86.
85.
Because it was in Group B. So it would have been earlier than that.
Anyway, red one, fantastic.
Red over white wheels, fantastic. The one you want for sure. Photographer from that was Alex Bellis, great photographer who I think he understood when he arrived how important that car was.
Do you prep these guys for that? Like, hey, this is what's special about this car, and this is what you need to capture?
If we feel like we need to, if it's something like that. For this one, definitely.
84.
Yeah. Group B ended in 86, so that would have a little bit late for it.
I already looked at this car a lot of times, but it's so sick.
It's so fantastic. And that was a crucial one because we don't want the photographer to just see Sport Quattro and think it's just a Quattro coupe.
Yeah.
Right. There's an important aspect to it. The fact that he had like detail shots of like the differential control buttons and things like that.
I see one in the listing here. That's the little 4-wheel drive icon. It's digital, right? Doesn't it show when
I think it has lights
on
show.
It. Lights on it. Yeah.
So Alex Bellis, great one. AB Photo, all one word. AB Photo on BAT would be a great follow. Another one, if you like great car videos, Jordan Cole. His username is Trust in the Machine. That's hyphen.
Ooh, solid username.
Sweet username. The only tough part is it's terrible to type out. Like if you're trying to at him, it just doesn't work.
Yes.
But trust in the machine, 4 separate words by hyphens. He like puts in this effort into videos that like no one really ever does. He kind of tells a mini story, lots of great audio capture, which is really tough to do. I think that's probably one of the biggest misses, especially in driving videos. People don't understand what it takes to get good audio in those spaces.
Yes.
Because of wind noise and all that.
And a lot of people, what's your feeling on the put the mic on the exhaust? I'm not a huge fan of it. Also, another issue that I noticed is, or that I think about a lot, is cars sound really different inside than outside. So it kind of depends on what you want to hear.
Correct. And I've even noticed a few sellers who even put, I think even 911 does this, puts a little like disclaimer at the bottom that the exhaust has been mic'd, because they don't want it to misrepresent what the car actually is, but they understand that it is part of the experience of the video itself. You're right. It sounds different. And then of course, like what if it's a convertible and you're trying to drive around with a convertible, then it's never going to sound right. So that's a tough one. I'm actually okay with it. From the pure entertainment standpoint, the problem is that the moment you bring in more technical abilities, it becomes more difficult, and you kind of separate people a little bit more. So sometimes it's just easier, just use the mic that's on the camera, mount it on the inside glass of the passenger's door, have it showing down road, but also your inputs, crop out the driver's face, let it rip. But yeah, his are great. Who else here? If we wanted to go on the other end of the spectrum as far as like quality, but not outside, Ted 7. I think you recognize that name possibly.
Yeah, I do.
Does studio shoots. Shoots for a couple repeat dealers on the site. He is a perfect example of what, after his auctions started happening, like his photo shoots, people start to copy him because they think
we see that quite a bit. Actually.
Quite a bit,
yeah.
And very few people do it well. Right? It is very obvious. Like you can pass with an okay photo of your car outdoors at sunset. It's really tough to pass with an okay photo of your car in a studio.
Yes.
And that's kind of one of my first myths of quality photography, is that you actually don't need a studio.
Yeah.
That's one of the early questions sometimes of White Glove is like, hey, I see these studio shoots. What do I do? You don't really need that. Unless you are of that caliber and you have that facility and equipment, because what you're not seeing there is a edgeless scrim on the back, giant lights, like
every once in a while, one of these folks will take a photo of their setup, and you're like, holy crap.
Just a physical space. It's a studio about probably the size of our office, which is around 7,000 square feet. Like it's a massive space. You're wiping down tires. You're cleaning the surface as they drive over. Like it's a whole other thing. At that level, Ted 7 is worth a follow because it's just that interesting and that intriguing. I would also want to put out a shout out to Driver Source.
I was going to say Driver Source. A lot of our very big, our power sellers who are well known, a lot of them, one of the reasons they get a good reputation is they're very good about taking photographs.
Yeah. Username DSFM 2005.
Oh, he's got that moving shot in the lead.
Lead shot. So that's another one.
Anthony Serra does now too.
Correct.
1600 Veloce does it too.
And unfortunately, most people can't do car-to-car photography very well. And their biggest mistake is...
Those are the only two I can think of who do it consistently well, actually.
Correct.
I've seen some shoddy attempts at
most of it is just like studio photography. Most of it is not great. That's a really tough one that you have to have an extremely good technical understanding of your camera and be on a really safe road where you can be doing this on and be willing to, sit in the back of a Golf with the hatch open and be getting real close, real far, real close, real far, and try over and over and over and over again.
Do you need a better camera to do something like that?
You have to have manual control.
Yeah, okay.
Because you have to control shutter speed and aperture and ISO, because obviously, ideally, depending on lighting conditions, you might have a lot of light, you might not have that much light. You don't want to go too high up on the ISO. You're going to start graining your image. Your shutter speed is going to be very dependent upon the movement speed of the car. So if you're doing a drag, the problem is you want to keep the car itself sharp. But if you aren't willing to drive fast enough or can't drive fast enough, then you have to leave your shutter open longer.
I was going to ask about, so it always looks at those, and obviously the car magazines do this all the time. That's what everyone's emulating. It always looks like the car is flying, but I always assume it's going a lot slower than it looks like it is. The background always makes it look like it's going like Mach 10.
For sure.
But what are they actually doing? Like 30 miles an hour?
If you can, probably. I mean, in theory, it's easier because you can actually get more attempts. Right? If you drive slower over the same period of area, you can. You
need a long straight road too. You forgot to mention that requirement.
And all too often, people do this while they're standing still, and what they end up getting is one point of the car is in focus, but they realize that because the shutter is slow, as the car moves on the sensor, everything else warps. So you only get one part of the car that's sharp. So you actually have to be moving at the same speed the whole time. And that's part of the complicating factor. But Driver's Horse does it really well. I also want to put a shout out to how thorough their stamping shooting is.
Oh God,
because that's
and they do the composite image too.
The composite image. I think what's so smart about the composite image isn't necessarily that you're showing all the different stampings. You're just saying, "Look what I got."
Yep.
And then people know to dig down deep, and they can look individually.
Well, if it's a Ferrari Dino or a Porsche,
Correct.
like a long hood 911, that's the first thing people want to see. And even when we're evaluating these cars to list them or put a description together, that's what we're looking for too.
Yeah, and with that composite image, it's establishing trust. You want to have that on the first day of your auction. Super important. It also, I think, establishes not just trust in the car, but like competency of the seller.
Totally.
And so that is
understanding what people want to see and demonstrating a knowledge of the product that they're offering, right?
And honestly, regardless of whether it's a Dino or not.
Right. I don't think anyone's done it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I mean, a composite image of the 10 VIN stamps on an S2000, like that could almost be a prerequisite for listing one of those cars. That's the first thing people are going to ask for.
I did it for my W124 300E when I sold it on the site. I'm getting engine
those old blue and white stickers that start to fade. I know those well.
Does anyone care if the engine's numbers matching? Someone will.
People
and they might bid.
Yours was a manual. People care about those. Did you see Lombok sold a diesel for $100,000 the other day?
That's incredible.
124s. I've been preaching to the choir since the 90s, back since the late 90s. They're wonderful cars.
That was a mind-boggling result. But
it's not our first six-figure diesel 124 either.
Interestingly, is that like possibly one of the few examples where a diesel sells more than a gas car?
Maybe. I can't remember if that one's the non-turbo. I didn't know this till fairly recently, but there's a non-turbo. The one that sold for even more it's a non-turbo diesel, but it's like double overhead cam. It's an interesting motor. I can't remember what the name is right now. They made a turbo version of it too. But the one that sold for all the money was a non-turbo. And my buddy who knows a ton about cars and his own Mercedes was arguing with me. And I was like, dude, I didn't know it either, but there's a non-turbo 90s Mercedes diesel that actually makes okay power for not being a turbo. Anyway, yeah, 124s. We can go down that tangent all day long. You missed that car ever? Your 300E 5-speed?
I miss how W124 for me was the perfect blend of engagement but relaxing.
Yes.
So I felt like I was involved with everything, but I wasn't stressed out.
Things happen slow,
right? They happen a little slow. 300E 5-speed. It was an 88. I think only the first 3 years, 86 to 88, did the manuals ever come to the US. So you can't get the later visual update or
the dot two or whatever they call it. Right. The cladding car is what I always think of it. Yeah.
So I miss that experience because I've never had that again. My E46 kind of okay. But like on the other end of the spectrum, for a while, my two-car solution was a 300E 5-speed and my 911 SC, the latter of which is anything like it is very stressful.
Yeah.
It's a completely different experience. And so I'm very glad that you and I discussed for a long time, I really wanted a 500E. And I figured, well, before I drop 30, 40K in a car, let me just try like little baby brother and see if it's actually an experience I enjoy. Big miss on that one was I was planning on driving my kids to school every day, and there's no way to do car seats in the back. In that one, there's no anchor points, and the rear seat belts don't have the lock if you pull it all the way out.
Oh, interesting.
You can't lock back, so I couldn't put car seats in it. They would just flopped around. It wasn't going to be.
I think a 500 as a daily would have bummed you out.
You think so?
Yeah, I do. My mom used we put 140,000 miles on ours or something, and my mom used it as a daily. But even we sold it in about maybe before 2010, and we bought it. My dad let me drive it home when I was 16. I remember that. So that was 99, and it was starting to get like every time it went to the shop, it was starting to get pretty. It's not a super exotic car, but I think you made the right choice. That 3-liter inline 6 is a pretty bulletproof motor and cheaper to work on and everything. There was one time we had to lift the whole intake manifold up for some reason to change the gas. Anyway, I don't.
Matt Ferris said, I think at best, a 500E is the best car for your friend to own.
100%. Yeah. They're super duper cool. I think they would feel, you're comfortable with older cars. I think they would feel dated for a lot of people now, especially the gearbox, that 4-speed, which is, it's a fine gearbox, but it's pretty, clunky.
Kind of disappointing people haven't started doing 5-speed conversions on something.
That's what they need, a 5 or 6-speed, because the motor just sings. And I like that kind of mix between German sporty feeling and a little bit
Sure.
like mellow feel of the W124. It's perfect. And the 500 is a
E34 M5.
little stiffer than the regular 300, but not much, you know?
It's probably E34 M5. Like that's
100%.
That's probably it right there.
I really like those cars a lot.
Yeah.
Don't get Randy started on E34s. That's another podcast. Any other shout outs you want to give?
Sure. Let's talk about Carissa Hosick, photographer out of Southern California, kind of lives a little bit on the road, like van life to a certain extent. We actually
hashtag
van life. We actually have another van life photographer, Ross Kiker, legitimately almost permanently on the road. It's amazing how
like shoot to shoot
to a certain degree. They're gone for long periods of time, but it also means they can cover vast swaths of America, which is kind of what you need when you're talking about, like, I need someone in Salt Lake and then I need someone in Reno. And like these are things that don't necessarily have.
Are they only shooting cars or are they doing other stuff along the way?
Oh, they're definitely shooting other stuff along the way.
Yeah.
For example, I'm pretty sure Ross Kiker, I think he is like the Mercedes Sprinter van photographer, like for Mercedes.
Oh,
like when
okay.
they do ad promotions for Sprinter stuff, like he's their person.
Little Sprinter on the rim of the Grand Canyon.
Correct. Yes. Gotcha. So he's doing that, and then he's also shooting for us cars in those areas.
Cool.
So
these all young folks for the most part.
For the most part, I mean, photography is a tough thing to do into your 50s.
I was going to ask, do you feel kindred to them? Because I mean, you lived that life a little bit when you were a younger man.
Yeah, at least what in this industry, you can scale your pricing relatively well such that you can actually sustain it longer. Whereas in the photojournalism game, if you don't have a staff job, you get burned out after a while.
Yeah, sure.
Because the newspapers are not paying any better than they were 10, 15 years ago. And you get to a certain point where like you just got to move on. And that's what ended up happening. A lot of young photographers then come out right out of college and they're hungry for work and they come in and they got a lot of camera debt they got to pay off. So they come right in.
You told me once that photographers rent their cameras. That's like one of the ways to make
other photographers. Right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's the best one is lighting gear.
Oh, sure.
Because you can invest in it, you can let it sit, and then if people need to rent it out, you just hand it off. And the likelihood of it being like damaged outside of a car is unlikely, but lighting gear is a very common one for sure.
Life of young photographers. I didn't mean to imply you're an old man, Beck. You're not as old as me. You're still very young. What else do you want to talk about? You got another big, broad topic we should hit? I said we were going to talk about other things, but we've only scratched the surface of photography, which is such a big part of the car world, the car enthusiast world, but especially of selling them.
I was thinking, not to undermine myself, but how do you get white glove-esque without paying for white glove?
Oh, totally. Well, I don't want to pull the curtain back too much, but you spend a lot of time talking people out of using white glove service. This is like a big part of your job, right? It's like saying like, hey, you might not need this.
The sort of subset of my job description is also sales for plus service.
Right, totally.
Like, not because I'm telling people that white glove is overkill for them, but when they're describing the car that they have and what they need, I think really at the end of the day, what they really just wanted is to talk to a human being.
Sure.
So that's what I'm their entry point. And then making them feel comfortable with plus service. But a few key points of how to sort of like get into the white glove sort of ROI, if you will, without having to necessarily pay for it. A big one, first and foremost, would be the pre-purchase inspection. Mm-hmm. Something I tell every one of my sellers is it will pay dividends just like detailing, just like paying for a pro photographer. Treating the car like it's a house to a certain degree, where you have your disclosures and putting it all out there, is a super important one as well. Cleanliness of the interior matters more than the exterior. Rarely have I seen someone complain in the comments that there's a little bit of mud.
I've seen
on the back of the wheel arches.
I've seen whole auctions like derail over it.
Well, no, it's much worse though. I think if it's the interior.
Yes.
If the interior is kind of grody and dirty, which is kind of like how our cars kind of really do survive.
Don't go look at my car right now.
Absolutely not. That's an interesting aspect of spending more time on that aspect of it would be a great one.
Also, photography plays a part in this. Like sometimes we've had, commenters point out that cars look like crap and it's actually not. The car's clean. It's fine. It's just the photography is not very good. So like you can get in trouble there too.
Yeah, that's an important one because the photography needs to be representative of the condition of the car. And we'll have it where a photo gallery comes in from a photographer and the seller sees it, and all of a sudden things that they didn't know about the car is presented, whether it's small scratches or it's dirt or whatever, things that they thought they'd cleaned the car or whatever it was. And that's an important one. We play a little bit of catch and release when it comes to these photos of like, that's fine, I'm happy to take these photos down once you clean it or repair
Right.
it.
Show us that it's not
and replace
more
the
serious
photo, right?
issue.
We're not just going to take them down. We want to replace
We
them.
don't want to hide. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But sometimes that's a necessary learning point. I think that's probably actually one of the benefits of going through a local partner would be that person's not going to even start the photography until they've sort of addressed those
Detail
things.
first.
They've just experienced that side of things.
Great point. And there's an added advantage there in that their reputation's on the line. So they want to they're seeing the car for the first time too. So they also need to get familiar with it in order to represent it properly, because they're the ones who are going to list it with Bring a Trailer. So that's actually potentially helpful. The PPI could happen during that period of time too, right? Service items could be addressed, because the downside of the PPI is that you may find out, oh man, that car needs a timing belt, or that car needs whatever, which is bound to come up in the auction. Right.
And that's
you're preempting the questions in some ways.
A common follow-up question to when the PPI comes in is, hey, sorry, I haven't scheduled the photo shoot yet because the PPI came back and it says it's got this, and this problem. Which ones should I do?
Totally.
And that's obviously
actually a lot of times you don't need to do any of them as long as you disclose them. And you're
so that's the thing too, right? People, the fear of
actually don't need no car is perfect. Actually, is the truth.
Never.
Yeah.
And the fear of the known is way less problematic than the fear of the unknown. And so by laying it out there, people can then put a quantifiable, especially the PPI has like this is what it would cost to fix these things. That's amazing. Because then a bidder can literally just like quantifiably decide, oh, well, that's just what it's going to cost me if I do it. I feel more confident in what it is versus if there's just no disclosure on that thing, then people have to assume.
Yes. Disclosure. We beat that drum all day long for years and years back. It's the most important thing. It is, I think, a huge part of why we've built a good reputation, but it is counterintuitive for sellers. And so it's kind of incumbent on us to always be explaining that.
I had a E30 325i Cabrio in college. I think I talked about it on last podcast with Randy and Zach and about driving across country. I drove this cross country half a dozen times. You might be surprised that an E30 Cabrio is not a great road trip car, but I did it anyway.
I actually am surprised. I would think they would be pretty good. It's got that same W124 mix of comfort and performance.
I mean,
maybe the Cabrio part. Yes, the Cabrio part.
Issue, right. That's the big one. I had that like in the Midwest in the winter. It was not good.
How was that back window looking, buddy?
It was pretty yellow. Pretty yellow.
Then they start to get brittle after a lot.
They get real brittle. I had a problem before I had it replaced. There was a hole in the fabric directly over the passenger seat, and I didn't have indoor parking in Illinois, and so the snow would build up, and then it would, during the day it would melt a little bit, so water would drip through, get into the foam seat. Then nighttime would happen. It would refreeze. And my girlfriend at the time would get in the car on literally an ice block.
Oh my God, Beck.
It was not great.
Yeah.
But eventually had that replaced, drove it back home, and eventually I swapped cars with my sister because I needed a better Midwestern car and she needed a better California car. And so eventually she didn't need that anymore. And so my dad tried to sell the car and he did like classic, just classified ad, hide all the faults, don't tell anyone what the problems are. Right. The brakes needed replacement.
You're really outing your dad here, Beck. Don't buy a car for Beck's dad.
If Bill Dievenbach. There's a few things Bill Dievenbach should be doing. But he did, I think, the traditional advertisement of just like, don't explain.
People are still doing it all the time. It's amazing to me that with how popular Bring a Trailer is, people still don't understand the secret sauce.
So I showed up at home and he still hadn't sold the car after like months have gone by and sitting outside of the house. And I went on to the BMW 2002 FAQ page because I was an O2 nerd at the time. And I posted it with the same asking price that we've been trying forever, but I literally did good bullet points, bad bullet points, just all the way down. I don't think I even
did you put air conditioner or cooled passenger seat? Was that in the plus column or the minus column?
Heated and cooled seats.
Heated and cooled seats. Only the passenger seats.
Only cooled seats
in Wisconsin.
Right.
Iowa. Sorry, right. Where you? Illinois. God, I screwed up twice.
Like a good Californian. The bullet points, though, like sold it immediately. And like that weekend, I had a guy with cash for full asking for that car. And it's just because he can associate those bullet points.
He knows exactly what's wrong with it.
Hey, great. I can associate what that's going to cost me to do.
It's not rocket science, but it flies in the face of how many decades of kind of used car lot dealer. Like I still see it all the time. Like the first 5 sentences are just utter BS fluff, like about what the car is. It's like, just tell me the truth about what it is and what it is not.
I talk to dealers.
I'm like more committed to it now than I was when I started 8 years ago. It's like the results speak for themselves, but you can't beat that mentality out of people. It's going to take a long time, which is great for us. I mean, we profit from that, the fact that other people can't figure that out. But
we get seller change requests, right? When the preview of the auction goes to them and the seller comes back. And I think you're just...
Why won't you say it's a nut and bolt restoration? Why just say it? It's nut and bolts. Perfect.
Because they bought that car from someone who literally said that
yes,
to them.
Correct.
Right. And so they're just passing it down.
Yeah.
They don't understand. But thankfully, I think that was a much tougher discussion for us, maybe 5-6 years ago. Frame off restoration.
Blow my brains out. It's the most meaningless phrase of all time.
We now
got me all heated up.
When people ask about that now, though, it's a much easier debate because I literally just link to other listings.
Right.
Like
how we did this and look what the result was.
Sometimes it doesn't even matter how exotic the car is because we have such great data now.
Right.
I can show you very similar examples of how we do things, and that just shuts down the argument, which is very nice to be in that position now. It was not the case.
When was the last time you ran into a car that we hadn't listed? We actually have I don't want to give it away, but we have a semi-exotic 70s European car coming up. That's our first example of one that we've ever listed. Now they only made like 50 of them. So, but it's very rare to me that we haven't listed something. We had our first Vector. We've had 2 Vectors now, but we had our first Vector W8 recently.
Mm-hmm. Mine was a Sport Quattro.
Recently. Interesting.
BaT had never had
That's our first Sport Quattro. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah. So, and interestingly, the seller of that car was such a BaT fan that his intro sentence in his email was, "You've never sold one of these."
Oh, he was waiting. He'd been waiting.
The funny part is, though, other people have also tried that line. Not true.
It's almost never true at this point.
One of one.
Yep. Yeah. We challenged. Maybe it was on the podcast. I challenged somebody to be like, "Hey, what's something we've never listed you want to see listed?" And whoever it was definitely a colleague. It was a long kind of
yeah.
Right, unless you say like 250 GTO or something, like there's not that many.
It was several years ago when I think we were all very much sort of temporarily, permanently Zoom based. And someone asked Howard in that podcast, "What's a car we haven't listed yet that you would want?" And he very quickly said F40, which at the time totally felt...
but that must have been shortly before our first one because we listed a couple now.
The joke is also that we could build an F40.
From the parts. Yeah, we've done a motor at that point.
We've done a motor. We've done seats.
Yep. We've done nose panels, wheels. Yes.
Yep. So that was...
We have F40 seats live right now.
Right now. I saw that earlier. Yes.
Oh man, toolkit. Here's rear wing, wheels. God, a lot of seats. No one kept their seats at their F40s. Huh?
Have you seen the Porsche documentation auctions, the 2 of them that are being offered from
there's one that's like 10,000 pieces. Correct. Or something, right?
They're both offered by the same seller. It's a defunct Porsche dealership, and it is incredibly detailed, like training manuals for dealership sales, how to like decorate your dealership.
Those are fat. Is that where they like tell the salesman, here's how you get somebody to give up their Corvette and buy a 911 instead?
Training stuff, but also like, here's all the answers to the questions you're going to get about the 928, which is coming out new this year.
No kidding.
Very cool stuff. Like super, super cool stuff. Like if I had a Porsche dealership, I would totally consider like having this to be in my library or something like that, just show heritage. But yeah, that's that's been nerd out. That's also the kind of listings I used to write back in the day when I was just writing listings, was I was always given the weird sort of esoteric.
Well, once you show manuals. An aptitude or an interest in that, we're like, great, here's a weirdo to take these things. We have a couple of folks now who love it. I shouldn't say weirdo because I actually love that stuff. It was when I was in Indy, my buddies were talking about, they're about 10 years older than me. They were talking about all the go-karts and mini bikes they had in Northern California in the like 70s and 80s, when it was just like no helmet on, like crack your elbow, break your wrist because you're on one of those Honda 3-wheeler. I mean, just like so dangerous. But they were talking about Rupp go-karts, and I'm like, oh, dude, we sell those twin engine Rupp go-kart. People so nostalgic for those, and like we could almost have a dedicated staffer just working on those things.
Auction of the year, I want to say in 2018 was a Rupp go-kart.
I think that was our twin. It was a twin, right?
It was quote restored.
Yes, that's probably what launched because this happens to us a lot. One is successful, and then everyone else has got one. It's like, oh.
So 2 examples of that actually, like very inexpensive.
Who was the first F40 seat guy?
I was going to say the other one is Z50 mini bike.
Oh my God, out of control.
So
how many of those we list? I actually think we do have a dedicated staffer working on those.
We have a dedicated page on it now. It's all model page.
Yep.
And it was one listing. It was Mark Shalero.
Of course. Oh yeah.
He had a Z50. It did really well on the site. And all of a sudden we got flooded with them. And then one day he called me a week later or something and said, "Hey, I've got another one to sell. I want to get it up this week." I'm like, "I'm sorry, bud, but we have 2, 3 waiting in the can."
You lit the fuse, man.
Exactly. We've just been inundated by this. But that Rupp go-kart, I wrote that listing. And what's so great about it,
it had kill room shots, didn't it?
Yes.
Speaking of to tie it all together,
it's lit well though. It was lit very well. It wasn't on a turnstile.
It was semi-dim, as I recall.
It's very dramatic. But what's really awesome though is that it's not the offering; it's the comment section.
Yeah.
I think it had hundreds of comments because people
of all the nostalgia.
They're
right?
just the nostalgia of it, and that was actually a talking point I had with a few sellers who were like, why is it that I'm not getting more push on my Ferrari? Why is it that people aren't engaging in this one? It's like, well, because that's not something that the common person of a certain age necessarily has experience with.
Yeah.
And that's where the Rupp
doesn't mean people don't admire them, but yeah,
for sure.
The one-on-one personal experience is not there.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where the Rupp go-kart came in really well.
Yeah.
Amazing. Do you have a question of the week you want to go through?
Selfishly, the one I want to go through is what's your favorite hot rod build? Because that's something I think about all the time. It was as if that question was tailored to me specifically.
You need Randy for that one.
We also had interestingly, I just want to acknowledge in case folks are listening, we did, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, our question of the week was, what do you want to hear on the podcast? And there's a lot of really good fodder in there, enough for us to keep going for the next year. So I'll have to, as I kind of compile all that and put it together into future episodes, you and I will have to hit some of those topics back. You're not really a hot rod guy, right?
I'm not, but only because I have no background.
What about American engine? There's 911 hot rods.
Sure.
You can stretch that term and it can mean quite a few things. There's certainly BMW hot rods too. You're an O2 guy and there's some wild O2 builds out there.
For sure. European 60s, 70s, 80s hot rods for sure is something that I've got some background in. American hot rods, especially pre-war stuff, I just don't. I wasn't raised around it at all.
Yeah.
You weren't seeing those around San Francisco in the 80s and 90s, and so I didn't really see them at all. Do appreciate them, but definitely yes, 911 hot rods could be its own model page on San Francisco.
For sure it could.
We had another 912 hot rod. I don't know if you saw.
I'm not sure I saw that one. We had a couple of years ago. We had an Emery Outlaw 912. I don't know if you can technically call it an Outlaw, but it was a Rod Emery built 912. Obviously, he raced 356s and knows how to build a pushrod 4-cylinder into quite the machine. But it may not have even been street legal. It had Lexan windows and stuff, but it was built with the beautiful attention to detail that Emery builds to cars. It's a car I think about a lot. If you were going to build your dream O2, would it be super hot roddy or would it be kind of a stock looking deal? Because I used to be give me S14 and flares and 5-speeds, and now I'm kind of give me a Sahara beige impact bumper, sleeper kind of, almost like the stock kind of example.
Sure. So I've driven a couple of O2s. TII is kind of the way to go if you want high rev power. You kind of have to. With the stock O2, with the single carb, it can be a little agricultural, as Vincent calls it, and I think he's dead right on that. It's a little bit too workhorsey. It's not as exciting in that sense. There is a very cool O2 touring hot rod that makes an appearance every year at the Bay Area Swap-In Show in Brisbane, which is coming up in 4 weeks. We're actually working on trying to have an O2 live on BAT at that event.
Oh, cool.
I don't know, hot rod wise of an O2. Yeah, having an M10 with dual side drafts, a 5-speed, unfortunately, you kind of have to go E21 5-speed. They sold a 5-speed stock with those. They're a close ratio 5-speed, not with an overdrive, which is very cool. A limited slip diff would obviously be amazing. If you had asked me 10 years ago, absolutely would have done Alpina pig cheeks on the side, maybe less so now. I love Tourings.
Yeah, I do
genuinely love Tourings. And so I think that would be a great one. In one of my O2 books, it shows a period O2 build with an M30 straight 6 in the front of it. I don't know how you fit that in.
Our guy Huff had a M20 in an O2.
Sure. So that was the M20 was definitely the swap you started doing once S14s became too expensive and hard to find. Whereas M20s are the little baby 6, probably much easier to fit than an M30, but you're sort of stuck at 2.5, 2.7. I had a buddy who had
M30 is a big motor.
It's a big motor, yeah, for sure. You would have had to cut either
move the radiator, or you'd have to cut into the firewall maybe to fit
Firewall.
that.
There's a kind of a false front on the nose clip of an O2 that people have cut into for a few times to fit it in. That's quite a bit. But people have done.
Is that where the periscope? What's it called? Is that where the airbox thing is? The snorkel.
The snorkel is the telltale that the front nose has been cut off if it's a TII.
Right.
Because they had stopped making TII front clips well before people needed them for their front end collisions. And so people would get carburetor front clips thrown on the front, and that's a big telltale we want to look for.
Look at you. You knew the answer. So wait, TII has snorkel or not has snorkel?
TII does not have snorkel.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Yes, TII should have a flush front end because the TII has an airbox on the driver's side that splits into two intakes versus a carbureted car, a base O2 will have a circular, classic carburetor, but then it then goes to a snorkel that goes to the front end clips. There's a hole in the front vent.
Gotcha. So what about 911? Do you already have your 911 hot rod build downstairs? Target top off today, I noticed. Delightful. We've discussed that before. You're right. Your head does stick way out of it. I haven't seen you on there in a while.
Yeah. And it just looks a heck of a lot better with the top off.
Looks fantastic.
Mine is...
Nice sunny day here in San Francisco. Beautiful.
Mine's a bit hot roddy, but I was limited by budget when I did it.
Your motor is, but the rest of the car is kind of stock looking.
Yeah. The motor is a 3.2 with 964 cams and a few other upgrades. But it's not crazy. It's not loud. It's not very abrasive. But I don't know. I actually would argue, I think Jerry Seinfeld actually once said, I think it's a great quote, which is, if you want a faster 911, buy a newer 911.
Yeah, totally.
Right. So starting off, I would love to have a 2-liter car. And I probably, if I had a 2-liter car, I would never think to even consider hot rodding it out. Right?
I know. I mean, the older I get, the more I want to experience everything the way it was stock. I'm also I read this many, many years ago, but I'm a big believer in the maxim that if you don't like driving a car stock, there's no amount of modifications you can do to it that'll make you enjoy it. Maybe that's not true with like a 32 Ford that has a 392 Hemi in it. That's like such a different beast. But for the most part, with the cars you and I tend to like, mid-century and forward European unibodies, but there's not a ton you can do. I mean, you see people doing these resto mods and stuff where they, take a muscle car body or a shoebox body and they put it on a complete custom chassis. So it's like really not the same car anymore, really, if you're buying an Icon build or something like that, right?
It's a similar argument towards electrification of if the mechanical nature of that car's origin is what makes it interesting, it's not worth electrifying, right? It's not worth hot rodding. It's not worth manipulating. But if the mechanical nature of that car was not the reason why it was exciting, for example, a Ford Bronco, right? Then it's possibly worth hot rodding.
It's so funny you mentioned that. We were just talking about O2s. When I flew out to Indy, I bought all the car mags they had. Not as good a selection of car mags at the airport, Hudson News stands as there used to be, but I can't remember if it was one of our sister brands or if it was Motor Trend or whoever, but they had the 2002 TE, which is this company. Have you heard about this? It's in Germany and they split it's an electrified 2002 and they split the batteries between the front and the rear to keep the weight distribution good. They only weigh, I think it's 2,600 pounds with 200 horse, which is more than enough. And they're doing like a turbo that's 300 horsepower, but it's got the front motor out of a Tesla in the back because that's all you need. That's 200 horse plenty for an O2. And the author of the piece claimed to be an O2 fan, so let's believe him for the sake of this argument. But he really liked it. And if those motors, I mean, I've driven plenty of M10s. I'm used to pushrod Volkswagen engines, so I don't find an M10 particularly agricultural when you get out of a shaky pushrod 4-cylinder Volkswagen. But if that's not the most compelling part of the car, then maybe that would be a wonderful thing to have. And they did this one was like, is it Golf? What's the yellow green color? Yeah, that color. They put Alpina wheels on it. Even the battery pack in the front, it's kind of shaped like the motor, and they put a crackle finish BMW branded cover over it. So it looks kind of like there's an engine in there. Anyway, I thought that was really interesting. I'd certainly be interested in driving something like that.
I think O2s, Beetles have penetrated beyond just car people. Like they were so appreciated by people who find them cute.
You could be have casual interest in having a classic car. Correct. And an electric version of a Beetle.
500,
totally.
Right?
Totally.
You can imagine there's people here in San Francisco who maybe they can't or don't want to deal with a gas-powered vintage car, but if it was an electrified little car that maybe the mechanical nature of it was not what was inspiring their devotion to it early on, that would be a great one to swoop in. Versus, say, a 911. And I know there's people out there doing electrifications of 911 and nothing against them, but that's one of those things where I feel like that's not going to happen.
Yeah, the motor is such a key part of it. The podcast Randy just did with Hannah Elliott, they were talking about how there's a lot of people who actually might be more tangentially interested in cars, but are intimidated by people who are like, oh, if you don't know how to rebuild a flathead Ford, then I don't even want to talk to you. And I'm extremely sympathetic to her argument, which is that, everyone's welcome in the club. You don't need to be an expert, but a lot of car people do tend to, and I'm probably guilty of this too, do tend to get overly wonky, and it really turns people off to the hobby and to enjoying what can be really a delightful hobby. Putting the windows down in a Beetle on a warm Southern California day, that's like hard to beat, whether you like cars that much or not, And
it's the exact same with photography. When you bring out the camera gear and people start trying to talk shop to make other people feel less important and like they're less good at the photography world, that's a real deal breaker for me. My latest camera that I bought is a Instamax Polaroid camera that I can take pictures with my kids. They grab it. They want to take it. Am I going to hand them my Leica? But they can handle my little Polaroid. Uh-huh. They can take pictures of me. My favorite photos of me now are ones that they have taken of me. The picture comes out immediately. That's an element of, it doesn't require a technical understanding, but it is elevated my photography experience to be bonding with other people, my children, that would never have happened had I been the type who was isolationist of, this is what it takes, this is what it needs to be, the lens needs to cost $5,000, and this is my bag.
Is a Polaroid the Volkswagen Beetle of cameras?
Oh, interesting. I would say Kodak was.
Oh, right.
Which Kodak had instant film that they did. Kodak brought cameras to the masses, right? That would be the equivalent. Great podcast topic is associating camera brands with car brands. It works.
What's Leica? Is that Porsche?
Leica is Porsche.
Yeah,
100% Porsche, right? Down to the point in which they were so ingrained with how they do things that around the same time of the 90s, 2000s, they were struggling and fledging.
Yeah.
And then eventually they decided how and both of them hired Japanese
to help them get them out of it.
To help them get out of it. Literally both. And to this day, man. Leica is making so much money. Yep. They're a hyper desired lifestyle brand. So much so, you go to Luftgekühlt now, Leica's got a booth.
Oh my God. There was a dude at the last Luftgekühlt with a Hasselblad. And I saw him 6 times and he's got it on a pet and he's looking down at it. And I'm like, that doesn't even look like fun.
And what is the car brand equivalent of Hasselblad?
It's DKW. I don't know.
I would say Mercedes.
Oh, okay.
Right. They're still technically
around. Hasselblad still makes cameras?
Yeah, they do. They make a digital version, a digital back to it. It's incredibly expensive. I think it's $50,000. It's super expensive. But yeah, they still make cameras, and they are just they are exquisite little jewels to move around, but they make the best leaf shutter noise that clicks like a Mercedes, W123 door slam kind of thing. It's just fantastic, but they're also kind of big. They're kind of heavy. You're not about to carry it to go on a hike. It's useful in sort of smaller case settings.
Clearly, I can't be part of the camera to car comparison podcast. But look at you, like a pro podcaster, bringing it full circle. You brought this, unlike me, bouncing wall to wall. You brought it right back to our opening topics. Perfect, Beck.
Just took 3. That's all it was.
What a pleasure. We need to go get another beer now. Well, thanks for doing this, man. We'll do another one soon. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll wrap it up there and maybe hit some more questions of the week next time. There's more to be done on the photography front for sure.
For sure. Keep sending them in.
Yes. Keep coming up with podcast topics so I don't have to do it. And then we're all set. Actually, we'll maybe try to dive into what the community wants to hear. Although people are very interested in photographs and photography. So this was perfect. Anyway, thanks, Beck. Thanks everyone for listening. Questions, concerns, feedback is podcast@bringatrailer.com. We'll talk to you next time.